I'm Bad Juju.
And I'm J-Bone.
And this is Bad Juju and J-Bone Presents. We've kicked Jude out of Titles, Talk, and Tipples. We're taking over to interview these great creatives here. Valentine, Wolfe, operatic metal music, and Campbell and Ayal, filmmaker, and Poe, impersonator, but I think he's the real deal. Sure looking good for 215 years old, Mr. Poe.
Thank you very much.
Could be better.
So, let's cheers to the great Edgar Allan Poe, who turned 215 on January 19th. Oh, yeah.
I can't do that.
Okay, so the reason why we gathered you guys specifically here is because you share Annabelle Lee in together. So Campbell and Ayal, you made an Annabelle Lee film, and Valentine, Wolfe, you made a music video, which the audience will see later on in the show. So, doesn't matter who goes first. What attracted you specifically to Annabelle Lee?
I'll go first.
Okay.
I mean, Poe. I mean, it makes sense, I guess.
I'll jump forward. So the short video that he produced was originally meant to be, was it Telltale Heart?
Wait, but let's start. Why Annabelle Lee?
So Annabelle Lee is part of my act when I perform as a historical reenactor as Poe for libraries and schools, museums, National Endowment for the Arts, and lots of theaters all over the place. And when I give the audience an option to choose which poem that I'm going to end my performance on, Annabelle Lee is one of the choices. And when I just say Annabelle Lee, in the audience, people go, oh, a lot of people learned it in 8th grade. That's really common. And they fell in love with it. And that love stays through their whole life. And so obviously The Raven is an option, and I give a few other poetry options as well. But Annabelle Lee is loved, still loved to this day.
Yeah, but why did he attract? Why Annabelle Lee? What I mean, what you just say is because a lot of people know it. But what made you attract to that poem? Why you chose to know that one?
So for me to perform with Annabelle Lee as a subject is that it evokes a lot of the ideas that we still assign to Poe to this day, because you have an historic human being, Poe, and then you have the cultural creation of Poe, that pop culture Poe, and that is a love of his life that so many people still think of today, and that idea of loss is still very much tied into his persona, and also him as a human being, as a historic figure, and as a pop culture figure, which I would assume also our other guests experience as well in their writing.
Right. Yeah, so, well, good little segue. Valentine, Wolfe, why did you choose Annabelle Lee specifically?
Yes, everything that you said is exactly true and exactly correct. So for our version of Annabelle Lee, we took the story of Edgar Allan Poe and his wife, Virginia, and we melded that story together with some of the lyrics that he wrote in his letters when he was talking about this relationship with her. And so we wrote our own lyrics, and we melded some of Edgar Allan Poe's words in, and we used the poetry of his poem as well. We wanted to combine all three elements because that just was the way the story fit together for us. I mean, obviously, I've always been into dark and spooky things, and so I love everything about that. And I wanted to combine all of those. I wanted to combine the real and the letters, the poetry. I wanted to combine all of that together.
Right.
For us, Annabelle Lee, whenever we play it live, two things happen. Generally, if people can name a Valentine Wolfe song, it's Annabelle Lee. And we've been talking about it every now and then. We try to give it a rest in our live set. And we were talking about this just like a week ago, and I just mentioned it never fails. If we don't play it, somebody will come up to us after the set and was like, but y'all didn't play Annabelle Lee. And we had been making music together for a while when we wrote it, but I feel like for me, that was like our first song, and it was interesting because Sarah was like, "We're gonna do Annabelle Lee," and I'm like, "I don't think we can't set that to music. It absolutely cannot work." But she was right. She put it together, and it really became like, again, it feels weird now when we don't play Annabelle Lee. I think we've got like 5 different versions of
Oh,
it.
okay. And you just did a new version for 2024, and the audience will get to hear that in part 1, and part 2 they'll get to see the video. When was the video made?
Oh, a long time ago. Our friends at Dead Horse Production, Vic and Kevin did that one for us, but I think that was way back in 2013.
Yeah, maybe around 10 or 11 years ago.
The beard's a lot blacker.
Yeah. And Ayal, so how did you end up making the Annabelle Lee film?
So at the beginning, I was at the time I was not happy with the job I had and decided to go back to school to pursue a passion I had when I was originally in high school, which is filmmaking and video production. For the final, we had to produce a video, a film, a short documentary, a music video, anything that is a video production, short form. At the beginning, when I knew I had a crew, I wanted to do the Telltale Heart because one of the main stories that Poe in his performances would do was the Telltale Heart, and I felt I knew it so well that in my head I could easily just kind of imagine how it would be if I needed to produce it. And then the pandemic hit. And basically, I went from having about, I think, 8 people that could have helped me produce it to the people that are right here. And I was like, to try and produce the Telltale Heart that involved, if we're talking about just acting, 2 people at least, but it turned out that it would just be easy having Poe probably recite it and do something around it. What it started with us starting in one location, which was an old armory, just slowly devolved into, you know what? Let's just drive around and find out a location and maybe combine everything into this weird, surrealistic video and see what happens with that. Luckily, I'm more of I've always said I think I'm a better editor than I am a director or a photographer, and even though I think we by the cuff shot a bunch of stuff, I was able to combine everything into hopefully a narrative that makes sense, and apparently I did.
Oh yeah, you did. And so I have a couple of questions about some of the shots. So like, I don't want to give away spoilers.
Go for it.
So at the end, Poe is facing the ocean, and you pan up, and there's a bird flying through. Like, how many times did it take to shoot that to get the bird in there? I mean, or was it just serendipitous?
The bird was a paid actor. No. I paid with background.
It's just so perfect.
Luck, just absolute.
Yeah,
I think that shot I did maybe 2 or 3 times to get the smoothness, and it just so happened.
Yeah.
There was a bird. You take it as it is.
Yeah.
It's
So
a sign.
Yeah, so you had the ocean, the forest, there was a brick wall behind the desk, and then another kind of messed up, I can't remember.
There was also marshland, the tunnel,
and then the cemetery.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, in the cemetery. So yeah, in that short little video you had a lot of sets.
We did that in one day, where we started in the area where you see Poe starting to write, and then we just said we can't do the whole thing right here. We have to do something.
That was a night, and then we shot the rest of it the next day.
And then I was carrying the desk around. Yeah, well, you had equipment.
Oh,
You
yeah,
had a camera, tripod.
Oh, I think it was just you and me together.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
And so that the desk that Poe's using, I'm lugging out onto the ocean, and people saw us, me in full costume carrying it out, and everybody saw us do it. And then we're like, sir, the cemetery that's nearby in our town, let's go do that. We think we can do this fast enough that we won't get in trouble. And we put it out in the cemetery, and there was a woman who was walking in through the cemetery, and I thought, oh no, she's totally going to call this in. And she saw me, she goes, you look great. And she just loved it. It was great. It just turned out to be a really lucky day of him choosing ideas and me throwing the desk around.
Like,
Wow.
seeing this in the cemetery makes sense, but when we were at the ocean, there were people walking their dogs, and then you see the full Edgar Allan Poe walking with a giant
Right.
writing desk, carrying it around. It was so funny.
Awesome.
So Violent Wolf, Valentine Wolf, you also filmed in a cemetery. So how did that go for you filming there?
There was no one in the cemetery when we filmed, so we were a little bit luckier. We went to a out of the way cemetery in South Carolina. There was no one else there on the day we filmed, so we were pretty lucky about that.
I think
South Carolina has a lot of crazy old cemeteries, just a lot of spooky stuff. And Edgar Allan Poe was in South Carolina for part of his life. And so we have been extremely excited to go to Sullivan's Island, where he was part of the time. And we haven't gotten any film footage from that area, but we've enjoyed visiting there.
Nice.
So that's a cool thing about Charleston. Apparently, the inspiration, and we've been to the graveyard where she is, but apparently the inspiration for Annabelle, she's in the Unitarian Church in downtown Charleston.
Okay, and is that Virginia? That's what.
Charleston, South Carolina.
But she's asking.
Oh, I mean, I'm sorry, Virginia, the woman.
Okay, no, it's not Virginia. But apparently there was a story about a young girl who was in love with, I think, a Marine who was stationed at Fort Moultrie, and like the character, apparently there was Annabelle Lee
So
is
there
apparently
is actually a lot of different ideas about this. Some people
exactly,
think that Annabelle Lee was inspired by Virginia
I think it's
as
a little bit of
bride,
both.
but other people have other ideas, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
But we've gotten to see Virginia. She's in what is it, Westminster in Baltimore. She and her mom and Edgar all are in the one grave in that burial ground. We got to see that. That was pretty cool.
We went to see it. We
Isn't
went
it
to
awesome?
the aquarium, and then we went to
Isn't that graveyard just incredible though?
Oh, yeah,
Like
it's
that
so
graveyard, and then you go around the corner and it's like there's
Full
this whole
city.
like world. Yeah.
It's like walking into the past. It's so quiet, and people are so respectful of it too. For the people who come in, it feels really respectful and caring for the setting.
Oh, very nice.
I will say for Annabelle's inspiration, Poe himself never said anything about it because he generally, other than The Raven, he didn't really talk about a lot of inspiration for his works because he was too busy trying to just make more money to keep the family going. But it was his mother-in-law, Maria Clem, who she stated that Annabelle was based on Virginia. And that was after his death when people started to ask a lot of questions about that. And so that intertwining of the fact and the fiction and his inspiration and parts of his life too have just continued on since immediately after his death on till today, which gives us as artists a lot to work with and a lot of interpretive power for what we bring to those stories.
Right, and the poem Annabelle Lee, so it wasn't even published publicly until 3 months after his death. He turned it into Union Magazine, I think, was who he submitted it to, like in 1849. They didn't print it till 3 months after his death in 1850. And I guess his editor read some lines from Annabelle Lee at his funeral a month after his, or some memorial or something, a month after his death. And so that makes sense that nobody was really talking about Annabelle Lee or wondering who she was, because before he died, for him to explain, so everybody had to guess afterwards.
One thing I mentioned in my act that everybody in the audience gets is he worked so hard in his life for just pennies. They were constantly in poverty, and even when The Raven hit, it was still a struggle for him. But then when he dies, everyone was ready to publish his works. Everyone was ready to make as much money as they could off of his legacy, without giving his family any money, without giving Maria Clem any money, or any of his extended relatives as well. And that's when they started to batter down the door, because as we all know, when are you really popular as an artist?
When you're dead.
Exactly.
So Campbell, how did you, and you know, I could get this information online, but I'd rather hear it from you. It's how long have you been impersonating Edgar Allan Poe, and what made you go that route?
So I started way back in 2009, and I've always loved horror, been a horror fan, just like everyone here and everyone who's watching as well. And I grew up, my mother is a retired American history teacher, so I grew up loving history and loving teachers and loving libraries. And in 2009, I was working with a haunted house. I'm a haunter, and
Me too.
yeah, and it was the anniversary of his birth coming up in '09, because it was 1809 when he was born. And I proposed doing a scene based on Poe and his stories. And I was working on that scene, and a friend of mine was working with a theater in Hartford, Connecticut that had gotten a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts Big Read program, which encourages literature and reading amongst all ages. And they were looking for an actor to play Poe. And I had not done any formal acting at that point beyond being a haunter and doing the crazy stuff that we haunters do. So I went up to the theater and said, "Sure, let's give this a shot." And they loved what I did. I think because I was bringing history with it, and I wrote it out not as an actor would. I wrote it out as a history lesson, just a really dressed up history lesson, because that's how my mother would teach classes, which was in much more creative ways than just read a book. She wanted you to really experience the history, and I love doing that. So they thought it was great. I did 13 shows under that grant. And then my name kind of got attached to it loosely. And I did the National Endowment for the Arts program another 3 times around the country. And then the woman who was managing me just said, when it was finished, she said, "You know, you're really good at this. You should keep doing it." And so I've continued to do it just as a really, really enjoyable, odd hobby on the side all the way through that for years now, and trying to bring a love of learning. Our dog has just
Oh,
he wants to be on
that's
screen
all
too.
right. Pets are allowed.
Why?
So yeah, so I tell everyone that it's a history lesson you didn't know that you needed. And one thing I get from my audiences too is that they all bring the same version of Poe that I did when I started out, which is I knew all of those pop culture ideas, and I didn't know the actual truth behind it, how difficult the life was, how he was so tied into American history. And so the kind of feedback I get is that it's entertaining, but also that they learned so much. And unfortunately for all of us, it got a lot more real for all of us a lot. Poe lived through pandemics and endemics, and Poe experienced violence during elections. And all of this has been tied into his life, and we're living that history again. And my audience is from middle schoolers up to women, people who are 99 years old in retirement homes. They all really get it now about what he was talking about in his stories.
Mhm. And Braxton and Sarah, you've done more than just Annabelle Lee for your songs. I mean, you have how many albums? I bought them all. 5.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. In 2013, we put out a whole album based on Edgar Allan Poe, and we called it Once Upon a Midnight, and we did Annabelle Lee, The Telltale Heart, Mask of the Red Death, so many of his poems and short stories. We did our interpretation of that, but that's been over 10 years ago. And so, of course, we want to do more. And we are definitely interested in exploring more of those ideas. Recently, we put out another Poe song. We did A Dream Within a Dream, and we've started setting The Raven. We can never get enough of Poe, you know?
The whole way back, when we first moved to our current hometown of Greenville, South Carolina, I was really excited to hear talking about the education things. We've done Poe music for middle schools, elementary schools. If you've ever seen a 5th grade class headbanging, it is absolutely as adorable. But we wrote some dark ambient music for a one-act play called Lamplight and Shadow, which was also a telling of Poe's life, because Campbell nailed it. There's this story, and it's just it's always fascinating to me about how so many horror icons are just so seared in our consciousness, and everybody just, I was like, oh yeah, we know who Frankenstein is, and it's like, well, but do we? And then you start digging in to Mary Shelley, and it's somehow even cooler. And I think Edgar is like that. That like it's so, it's so many people. I mean, my first contact with horror was Telltale Heart in third grade, and so it kind of gets so like up here and familiar that like it takes a second to like give some distance and like just realize how like jaw-dropping virtuosic he was as a creator, and telling the story of who he was as a person in addition to his work. It's something that we started exploring, and to your point, we've done that with quite a few people, but I think there's a special place in our heart for Edgar Allan Poe. When we finished both the theater score and the album that Sarah pointed out was talking about, that was just a very cool project. We did a graphic novel with it. It was with one of our best author friends. It was very cool. It's out of print now. That's why it's hard to find for our stuff. But we realized something. We could make a whole career of just doing Edgar Allan Poe music, because there was just so much we didn't touch. So it's awesome to like go back to it. And just there's always something more to discover. It's so inspiring.
Absolutely. Not just his stories, but his poems and his comedy, his satire, mystery, and detective novels. Gonna do a detective song. Go ahead.
I'm an old school Iron Maiden fan. Murders in the Rue Morgue right here. Yeah. I mean, I was like, wait, what is that? Oh, that's a short story. Who's it? Who's this Edgar Allan Poe guy?
Oh, cool. Okay.
14-year-old metalhead. Imagine this with like a mullet. I'm like, let's find Edgar Allan Poe, because like,
wow,
so over British heavy metal. Yeah.
So a heavy metal band got you into Edgar Allan Poe. That's great. Yeah, like many, I got into Edgar Allan Poe through in late junior high, 7th, 8th grade, when they had us memorize a poem, and I wanted to memorize The Raven, and that was really long, so I memorized El Dorado instead.
How long did it took you to memorize The Raven?
I actually worked for a number of years performing without memorizing anything, because it's really hard to memorize these things.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And I saw and I sat down and I did the thing that I think most people hate doing, which I hate doing too, which is I watch myself on video from doing these performances, and I realized that I just wasn't connecting very well with the audience, and so I sat down and just started to make it a project to memorize my whole act and memorize as much as I can, so that I can actually look at the audience and emote with them and be more present with them. And so I'd already done it a lot, so I was already very familiar with the poems, but I added it in as full memorization, and I add in a few things every year just to keep things fresh and give myself more options for what I can do, especially if I have a longer show, and I give the audience options just to ask me to do different preferences, and so I'll have a few more poems under my belt too.
Nice. And with the memorizing, have you ever forgot something on stage?
Oh yeah.
I mean, just
Yeah, I have gone.
I was there. Yeah, you skipped.
I can skip lines. I went completely blank one time, but it was with an audience of librarians, so they were very, very forgiving. I love librarians. Librarians are the best people in the world.
There was one where you skipped, I think, like a full block maybe, and but the thing is, it was early and nobody will even notice. And like,
yeah, unless somebody's following along,
yeah.
I'm smooth enough to catch myself. But for stage performers, like, and for musicians as well, like you get into your groove, and once you've done it long enough, you can recover very quickly, and either smooth it or just keep going, and the audience is with you because they're on your side. They want to be entertained. They want to have a good time. They're not out to get you. You just trust your audience to go along with you.
I mean, they came to see you, so.
Yeah.
Great. How about you, Valentine? Wolfe? Any funky little hiccups?
Oh yes, sometimes sometimes we are so lucky when people come to our shows and they've either seen us before or they've heard our music before. And so they are singing along with the songs. And that is just the best feeling in the world when somebody is going to sing along with your songs. But sometimes they'll say the verses out of order or they'll have the words slightly wrong. And if I'm making eye contact with somebody while that is happening, that can throw me off a little bit.
The
But
clapping,
it's
clapping,
still the
that's
best
all.
feeling in the world to know that somebody out there cares enough about the same things that we do, that they would be, singing along with us.
My favorite story about that I tell when Sarah wrote the melodies and demoed Annabelle Lee, and both in the revised, I'll call the definitive version that we put out this year. I think it's the third verse. We have this cool like quasi string quartet breakdown where the metal drops out and I'm playing these sort of 16th note kind of string quartet texture things, and the lyrics are, "Let me have under her own hand a letter bidding me goodbye. I will cry, my heart will break, but I will say no more." There's a lot of buts in there. And when Sarah sent me the lyrics, I was like, well, maybe we can clean this up. This is a little awkward and all that. And she's like, well, we could, but that's a quote from a letter he wrote to his mother-in-law. So if you really want to correct his grammar, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to stay in my lane and work on the bass parts.
Nice. And Ayal, so were you a Poe fan before meeting Campbell, or like were you both Poe fans, and like what's the story with that?
For me, it's like originally, I was just interested in literature, and I wanted to explore, especially when I started learning English, I wanted to explore more English literature. So I was reading Alice in Wonderland, I was reading The Never-Ending Story, and I got my hands on Edgar Allan Poe's work. So the one that stuck with me was mostly on that collection I got was The Black Cat and The Pit and the Pendulum.
Oh, I love
And what got me is that it was so different than horror that I've read before that. There was just, it's not just the level of creepy or whatever, it was just, there was such level of dread and different point of view that I haven't seen in anything else that I've read before. So just for the years, I just grew more and more interested in Poe. And then this happened. And now our household is very intertwined with Poe, which, I mean, it's part of our life, and the more he's learning about Poe and the more he grew knowing more and becoming Poe, it made me appreciate Poe even more and knowing more about him.
Oh, wait, tell me when you were in your English class and you did, and you were assigned Poe and you went,
whoa. Oh, yeah. Okay, so we had an English class, and there was this story that I think I was the only one who knew it. I can't remember if it was you probably remember something else. I'm trying to remember exactly which story it was, but there was, for example, a test. Oh yeah, we had one thing. We have an English test, and one of the questions was about the murders in the Row morgue, and our class didn't learn that, but I knew it because I read about that story before that. So I was the only one to get like extra credit because I answered that question that nobody else knew.
Nice.
What's the other one?
Well, also because you started doing Poe and you raised your hand and you said, "I know this because I'm married to him."
Oh yeah, that was in college. Yeah.
Yeah, in college. Yeah, and it got me in as a guest.
Oh, that's it.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool. Very cool.
That's so cool.
That is so wonderful.
awesome.
That is
But we
such
have another
a great
connection
story.
that's kind of weird.
I just want to note that sounds psychotic if you don't know any background to that statement.
I'm ready to go.
Oh,
And
that's amazing.
I do have a really cool story that talking about just growing up loving horror and him doing Poe. We went to a horror con where he was a guest as Poe, and we one of my icons. Like growing, the reason I love movie horror, is because of Night of the Living Dead. And at the con was Judith O'Day, Barbara from Night of the Living Dead.
Oh, yeah, awesome.
When we went to talk to her, I did not know what to say. I was just so starstruck, because this is an icon.
Mhm.
And what happened was that
she's incredibly sweet woman, and she asked me about what I
she
was
saw
doing.
this, and,
Right. She asked me about it, and I said, well, I'm here to I'm performing as part of the con, and we just want to meet her and get her signature and just do the normal con thing.
Yeah.
And she goes, oh, I'll come to your show. And I went, oh, thank you. That's very nice of you to say that. And she came to the show.
She actually came.
She sat on the front row, watched the whole thing, and hugged us later. We saw her at another con.
Yeah, a year later, we
year-
started another con, and she was like, oh, and she came and hugged us and talked to us.
Hopped up and hugged us, and she's an incredibly sweet woman.
And I was ready to die. I'm good. Done.
But that, I mean, it shows like that love of Poe is so across the board.
Yeah.
It's with so many different ages and so many different people that it's the first time you've ever met someone, you can connect over that, and you hear the same stories of when you were first introduced to Poe, when that one story and that one poem really hit you, and it's kind of heartbreaking that we all do this now, and we can't tell him.
Yeah.
How much he
Right.
Maybe one day.
Well, yeah, actually, one day we might all have the opportunity.
Yeah, maybe, who knows? So
We have a very similar story. Like it's like the exact same story, but we were lucky enough to do it with Elizabeth Shepard, who was Ligeia in Roger Corman's. And we were at a horror con. We got to talk to her, and she's like, well, I'm going to read Poe. And we kind of the con runners thought it would be cool. And so I've gotten to play ambient bass in a mellow declamation with Ligeia reading that monologue. And like, it was the same thing. We were like, well, I don't think she'll like metal. And then we were playing our like heavy set, and like, she's right there in the front row tapping. And it's amazing that sort of like, these people like what we're doing. So it is awesome to hear these experiences. And I'm with you. It's like that Doctor Who episode where he brings go. I wish we could do that with like Edgar. Look at what you've done.
Yeah.
Look at what you've done for the world. Like you are a national treasure, and like so many people, our lives are better because you were who you were.
Yeah.
He would probably say, awesome, where's my check?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
if it were up
to me, I'm like, my brother, how much money do you want? Because how can we take care of you? Absolutely.
Royalties.
Yeah, seriously.
One thing I do mention in my show too, when I mention Annabelle Lee at the end and give the audience an opportunity to choose it or not, is what you mentioned, that it wasn't published in his lifetime. He saw The Raven hit huge. He never saw Annabelle Lee hit.
Yeah.
The way that it is loved, absolutely loved today, he never got to see that because that was published afterwards, and he never saw the kind of effect that poem has had on people for over, this amount of time.
And so many people have done songs, and they're all over YouTube. Several, we haven't seen them all, but tons of little short films and everything based on his work. Professional and amateurs, all over the voice. But
No,
it is past the 30-minute mark. So, I mean, we have a free evening, but we don't want to hold you guys up. So I just wanted to let you know where we are in time. We're out of time if you need to move on.
A few more minutes. I'm happy to hear that. What?
Yeah.
Great. All right. Valentine, you okay?
Yeah, we can hang out. No, like all I was just gonna say is like, to make the point of the multifaceted dimension of getting to know Edgar Allan Poe and his work and encountering it, like until tonight, like I had no idea. As many times as I played Annabelle Lee live, I learned like half an hour ago that he didn't, like, it wasn't published in his lifetime. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Like, I never really thought about that one way or the other, but I didn't. But I was like, wow, that's just incredible. It's extraordinary.
I think for a
That's
lot
all I was
of
gonna say.
us,
I just didn't realize that.
yeah, like Campbell, you were pointing out, a lot of us thought that he was known in his life, all over, and he wasn't. So yeah.
He got popular for The Raven, and he was already known as a critic, and The Raven shot him up to superstar status. But for the kind of fame that we think of today, yeah, nothing close to that. And he would have loved the fact that he outshined so many of his fellow writers of his day. He would have absolutely adored that. And especially that a lot of them that he had little tiffs with over the years have just been forgotten, that he would have just adored every bit of that. And that's something I try to bring on stage, is some of his ego, which was well earned, and he could be so funny. He criticized people.
How to write a Blackwood article, right? I have a question for Campbell. If this is cool.
Yeah.
We mentioned how popular he was with The Raven, and there's that famous essay on craft and everything where he analyzes and he breaks down The Raven. And there's some scholarly debate about was that actually his process, or he did that after the fact? And like, given your bona fides, I'm just like, I do not mean this is a gotcha. We just met, but I'm like desperately curious because I always like doing this. What do you think about that essay? Is that like, I mean, I think it has a lot of good stuff. I think I'm just curious, like what's your take on that with The Raven and everything, and like what his thoughts were?
So I know exactly what you're talking about. So this is
awesome,
right after he becomes famous for The Raven, he actually starts doing speaking appearances, performing The Raven, talking about his thoughts of poetry, and then ends up publishing an article about poetry and called On Poetry, and specifically breaking down what he says is his writing technique for all poems, and saying that that's also what he brought to The Raven. And then he lays out how he writes The Raven, saying that he starts with the end idea, works his way backwards from it. And the one really good line that comes out of that, and it may also be on prose as well in the short stories, is it should have a unity and a single effect, like be very tight and very clear. And I agree with you. And from what I've also read from other critics, is no one really buys what he wrote out, is that he's trying to apply this really scientific method of writing art that just doesn't seem to jibe with the kind of emotion that's in his poetry, and sounds a lot more like he's creating a kind of persona around himself and around his writing task, which I think any artist, honestly, I think any artist knows how muddled and how muddy a lot of creation is, and that you can apply systems to it and everybody has their kind of own thing. It's just much more mixed about what you're bringing to it. And at least from my point of view, and at least from some other critics that I've read, is that this is an after the fact published bit. Some of it is true, some of it is representative, and some of it is him trying to make himself seem much more structured than what he actually was as a poet. And he never wrote anything else really akin to that people jump on and say, yeah, this is clearly an example of this poem and this poem and this poem. It doesn't really seem to jive with what was more likely him as an artist.
Right. Yeah, I guess all of us could claim that, right? It's like, if people want, the worst question you can ask a writer is, what's your process? Or like to give themselves a review, or to in a paragraph, can you describe your song, your book, your play, whatever, your film? And it's like, because yes, it's the artist's way, the artist's mind. It's all over the place. All right. Well, do you have anything you want to ask?
No.
No. It's the silent partner.
I mean, I'm just hanging out, talking Edgar Allan Poe with people. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is great. This is awesome. So we're going to have you all back on the show one of these days. Valentine, Wolfe, you're going to hopefully be in our horror band episode. Campbell, you're going to be hopefully in our winter solstice episode. And yeah, thank you very much, you guys. It was so great to meet you. I've been talking to you, I feel like, texting and messaging and emailing for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so I'm finally glad to sit with you and chat.
And I'm happy to have met everybody.
Yeah,
And
you got such a
speaking-
smile on your face.
You know,
Yeah.
I am a dead guy, and I
Big
haven't met
fail.
anybody. You know, I just remember going to sleep and waking up like this. There wasn't, I
Please remember
didn't get
to
to
brush
meet
it.
anybody.
So to find out where I'm performing next, go to rottenartist.com. Exactly the way it sounds, rottenartist.com, and there's links to all my socials and upcoming shows.
On my socials is Haunted Cosplay.
Oh, great.
I've had so much fun talking about Edgar Allan Poe, and I would love to talk about it more with more people.
And if you want to make that happen, valentinewolfe.com.
Wonderful. And thank you very much. All right, you guys have a wonderful evening.
Y'all are amazing.
Thank you,
all so
thank
much.
you,
It was
thank you
wonderful
very
meeting
much. Wonderful meeting you guys too. I look forward to further endeavors to chat with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.